Welcome to our session, The Mind, Theater, and the Elusive Self. I'm Janna Levin. I'm an author and an astrophysicist, and I'm really honored to be in conversation with the incomparable David Byrne. We're doing self-introductions. We decided I would just embarrass him if I introduced him. And also, I really don't think David Byrne needs much of an introduction, but we're going to do a self-introduction. You can be like, I was born in a small town.
Hi, my name's David Byrne. I'm mostly known as a musician. And thank you. But for quite a number of years now, I've been working on theater projects, some of them immersive, some not as much. And right now, I happen to be here because tomorrow I head to Denver to start tech rehearsals and rehearsing actors on a piece there called The Theater of the Mind that I've been working on for about 8 years now.
Well, The Theater of the Mind, which I've been following for a number of years during its earlier incarnations, it's experiential. The participants, the audience, they are themselves active participants. It's also theater. It's also narrative arc. It has a lot of these kinds of elements, and yet it's rooted ultimately in your interest in neuroscience. And so yes. I wanted to start by asking you, what were the experiments in neuroscience that got you interested, first of all in neuroscience, and then how you mapped it to a theater piece?
I don't know when, but it might have been, maybe a dozen years ago, there started to be like a spate of popular books about the brain and neuroscience, and that the faucet has not been turned off yet. They're still coming, and there's lots of really great ones. And at one point, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago or something, I read about an experiment by the Urson Lab in Stockholm, and their paper was called Being Barbie. And the experiment involved VR, and in it, you are embodied in the body of a doll. You think that that's your body, and what their interest was, what they found interesting about this is that you scale the world according to your perceived body size. So if you're little, then something that's there seems further away. Certain people seem bigger. All those sorts of things. They did other ones. They did one where you're embodied in the body of a giant. And
this is with a VR headset on.
Yeah, you wear a VR headset. So I had the idea to invite them to install their experiment in an art gallery. Then I would reach out to an art gallery in New York and say, and the idea would be one-on-one, art gallery visitors would basically just take part in this experiment, the same thing that they were doing. And I thought, well, basically I was being selfish. I wanted to experience this. Part of that impulse, the thing evolved way beyond that. But part of that impulse was to take something from one context, a science lab, and move it to another context. In that case, an art gallery. And I've found that if you move things from one context to another, it has a huge effect in the way people perceive it. I could go on for a long time here, but in my own experience, I just finished a run of a show on Broadway, and I worked with a contemporary dance choreographer.
That's American Utopia, of course.
And I'd worked with her for a number of years, and the first time I worked with her, audiences loved what the movement and the dance and things that was going on as part of our show. And I commented to her, not in a derogatory way, but I said, people love your work, but this audience would never go to see your work if it was just presented, under your group's name. And I said, it's all about moving the context. You move the exact same work into the context of a pop music concert, and everybody gets it, and they love it. And I thought, okay, you can do that with science too.
Right.
You move it into a different context, and it takes some of the barriers away. So in this case, it went from being an idea in an art gallery, which that didn't happen, to actually expanding and growing and growing and growing, and now it's going to be 7 different rooms, and the final one is based on the Urson lab.
Didn't you tell me one of the first incarnations was at a car dealership in
Yeah, we did.
Menlo Park or somewhere?
There have been many workshops, many.
And you did one on Governor's Island, which is
One at Governor's Island in the winter.
old Army barracks.
All closed. One at a car dealership in Menlo Park. And each time we learned things. This is part of the process. The process is, for me anyway, really interesting. For instance, in Menlo Park, we did some of these perceptual experiences that we're still doing, but we did a lot of social and, I guess, psychological experiments too. There was some economic games, there was some moral dilemmas.
And they're not all pleasant to go through necessarily.
Yeah, like moral dilemmas, we kind of push. We did a thing where we'd show them like a scene from a Star Trek episode and say, okay, you're Spock, and you have to stop Kirk from rescuing that girl, or Nazis will take over the world. That was the premise of the episode. How far would you go? Yeah. How far do you have to go before you won't do it? Or how far you go before you'll kind of kill someone in order to save a large number of people, things like that. This puts people in a really uncomfortable position, and
they don't enjoy it as much.
They don't enjoy it as much. And what we did was they would give their answers on a little, on a tablet, and we would aggregate the answers and then present it on a screen. And so you'd see, 70% said this, 70% for this. It wasn't, unlike in a perceptual experience, it wasn't something that everybody had the same experience. If it was 70%, 30% of the people said, I didn't vote for that. Yeah, he's not my president, whatever. And so
didn't you say the behavioral economists love it, but they were the only ones?
They really liked it. It was based on their work. Yeah.
So the idea even of doing a survey, here you're taking science, but you're very much trying to make a narrative art piece out of it. Science is a creative subject, that we've talked about that, and yet you surveyed your audience. I can't imagine you making an album and surveying your audience about your album. Like, what did you think of that bridge? Or, so what about this made you feel more open to audience response or opinion?
That's interesting. It's true. If I was doing music, I'll have a small group of friends and collaborators that I'll bounce ideas off and take suggestions from, but I don't like crowdsourcing.
It's not a democracy.
Yeah. And yet in this case, well, in order to see if it's actually working, you have, especially an immersive theater project, you have to test it in front of an audience. It's even more so than a regular play, where it's, the proscenium, and you write it, and you put it on, and there it is. In this case, it really, how it works, and if it works, depends on how the audience perceives the things. If the perceptual things get a reaction from them, and then if they do, then you can proceed to kind of drop a little hint that, what does that mean for your sense of self, or whatever.
So you were scientifically experimenting with your audience, in a sense.
A little bit, yeah. You have to kind of
experiment.
Okay, let's see what this works. Does this work? Okay, now we're going to go there. Yeah.
Since this is all very abstract, I think it would be nice to concretize a conversation. David has a clip of renderings of the version of Theater of the Mind that's going to be opening in Denver on August 31st?
September 13.
Okay, September 13 until December, sometime in December.
Yeah, in August we start previews, yeah.
Okay, previews in August. So this is happening, and while you're not going to see the real thing yet, you're going to see a rendering of conceptually the rooms, the several rooms that David was describing.
There's a guide.
Yeah, please set it up.
There's a guide who, unlike a lot of immersive theater things where you just wander around and push buttons and see things and go ooh and ah, in this case, there's a small group, 16 people, a guide meets them and takes them through a thing, and it's scripted, and there's a narrative and of the guide's life backwards. And so the audience really has to follow and has to do certain things.
And the guide is you, but not you.
Yeah, they start by coming out of a coffin and saying, "Hi, I'm David Byrne, and I'm dead." But they don't look anything like
But it could be a woman. It could be
exactly.
like,
Yeah. We play with identity.
So let's watch this, and then we'll put it more into context. If our guys are ready.
David Byrne here. This will be a very quick fly-through of the Theater of the Mind experience without props and decor. We start in the lobby, where audience members arrive in advance of their timed entry. After they check their bags, coats, and phones, the 16-member group assembles, and a PA ushers them into Anteroom 1. And here they get their new names and identities, and some basic instructions before being admitted to the funeral chapel. Their guide, an actor, now emerges out of a coffin and says, "Hello, I'm David Byrne, and I'm dead." The guide will lead us through his life backwards into childhood, room by room. Here there are some audio, visual, and identity experiences in this funeral chapel that prepare the audience members for what is to come. A hidden door is opened to reveal a passageway into the guide's skull. Here, after a period of adjustment, audience members will see things that they know are not there, while discovering a little bit more about the guide's identity. A panel on the wall eventually opens to reveal a passageway to a discotheque, where audience members see their friends disappear, exactly as happened to the guide when he was in Berlin. There's a musical performance here, and the show is interrupted, and everyone is led backstage. Here, the audience sees the guts of the show, and they see video monitors, and one of them reveals the things they're missing, the things they're not seeing. We approach the back of a cyclorama eventually and find ourselves in a suburban backyard. Here, the young guide's birthday is taking place. So we find that we fairly easily adapt to a completely skewed reality, almost too easily. Then we're led into the kitchen, which is as it would look to a small child. It's giant. We meet this child. It is the young guide. This child leads us to the attic. Here, the audience members are embodied in the body of the child. Our sense of scale is completely disrupted. The grown-up guide now appears giant, as would happen to a small child. The grown guide and the child self-question their identity. A door appears in the attic, and we exit. Looping back to the beginning, we exit into Anteroom 2. This anteroom appears to be the same room that we began in, but it's not. We return to our old names, our old identities, and we exit back into the lobby.
That's the end of that. Okay. So.
Each room is based on a scientific experiment. Would that be right to say? Each room is based on a different
Yes.
neuroscience experiment. So when you say, does this work for the audience experientially, what is it that works means to you there? Do you want them to begin to question the idea of self, the idea of their own identity, the idea of yours, or do you want them to have an unexpected reaction that maybe you haven't foreseen?
By work, since there's perceptual phenomena that happen in most of the rooms, that has to work. They all have to experience that. If it doesn't work, then we have to mess around with the tech stuff. On the other level, there's a narrative, that narrative of the guide's life backwards, and it's kind of discovering things about the guide's life that has to work as a narrative that kind of pulls you through. And
So
has
there's a theatrical element that has to work.
Yeah, that has to work. That we didn't have at first, and we realized that we needed a more emotional connection. My thought is kind of the general idea, and what I hope the inference is that you'll see that your perception is fairly unreliable, and our memories are made of how we perceived various moments in our lives, and our memories are therefore also unreliable. They are constantly, and every time we recollect something, we're changing that. Our memories are what we use to construct our sense of ourselves, and therefore that is constantly changing as well. You might say it's unreliable, you might just say it's constantly in flux. And lastly, we kind of get to our sense of identity, who we see ourselves being in the larger picture of the culture and the people around us and the social world and all that. We start to question that. Is that flexible as well?
And you described context earlier. You mentioned, if you brought dance elements into a musical piece, that context allowed people to be receptive to that. But you're also going deeper, I know from our previous conversations, where there's a sense in which you've suggested that somebody's identity is also responding to the context. Like there's not this fixed in stone identity that relates predictably in any context, but it's not just that people's perceptions are altered by the context, but maybe their very selves or their very notion of who they are.
Some of this is a little controversial. I don't know if it's accepted by everyone. There was a book by Ross and Nesbitt called The Person and the Situation that some of you may know that says that the context, the situation that we're in, has much more of an influence on how we react than our individual personalities. We tend to think that, I have a personality, I react in my own distinct way to things. And they're saying, not as much as you think. And then there was Walter Mischel, the guy from the famous Marshmallow Test, which many of you know.
You know the marshmallow test, he puts a marshmallow in front of a child, and what does he say? You have to wait an hour and you get another marshmallow?
Yeah. Or you don't want it right now.
Dying.
Yeah.
They're dying.
He also wrote an early book where he said that, the consistent behavior from a personality there doesn't seem to be that much evidence of it. Not everybody agreed with that, and I think he had to deal with a lot of pushback on that as well. But there is that thought that the context, as we were talking about, like taking the science and putting it there, putting the dance somewhere else, really determines how we perceive something. And we would like to think that our individual selves are kind of fixed that way, but I think they change all the time, and how we react determines where we are and how we do that. Which brings me to something that Janna does. She runs a series of talks at a place called Pioneer Works in New York called Science Controversies. And it's a series of talks, really amazing, incredible speakers and people come to these things. But what struck me about it was, again, the context. These same people might give a talk at Columbia University, where you are, but the audience would, I think, I'm going to guess, might be a lot smaller and behave in a very different way. At this place, people can drink beers, they socialize, it's much more relaxed. I think, as you said, it's like bringing the scientist to their house
That's very
instead of
much
you
true.
going to
the ivory tower.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Changing the context like that completely changes the audience. You have this young audience that's really
Lots of
excited.
artists.
Yeah.
It's absolutely true. People, it's not, you don't have a ticket, sit in the auditorium and leave, right? They're invited, and Aspen Ideas Festival is doing something similar in that we have this context where we're hanging out, and we're having lunch together. So people come early, they sit in the garden, they stay late, and they very much feel that these Nobel Prize winners, these Pulitzer Prize winners, these amazing people are in their house, as David said, and it makes them much more confident in terms of much less intimidated, and they receive the information really differently. It's kind of fascinating, and we push it really far. I like to say every conversation has to, I borrowed this from a former professor, every conversation has to have something everyone understands out of respect for the audience, something only a few people understand out of respect for the experts, and something nobody understands out of respect for physics. And I think, I think that that's the kind of arc we try to take, that by the end, none of us, not even the Nobel Prize winners on stage, they're at the edge of what they understand. That's very exciting to watch, I think, the total unknown. But this idea of bringing science, and which you've been discussing is very creative, you feel it's very creative, into other creative subjects. It's like this synesthesia. You play music and people dance. That's actually a weird kind of synesthesia, like our senses are crossing. People dance and you think of visuals and I almost wonder if there's this neurological cascade between these creative ideas that is more resonant when they're all together, when there's an opportunity for one to ignite the other.
Historically, when was it, the Renaissance or something like that, where the arts and sciences were split apart?
Yeah.
Before that, science was...
It was after that, yeah.
Science was considered an art.
Science was a scientist is a pretty recent word.
Yeah. And to a certain extent, I think some of the things we're doing
putting it back
is
together.
putting that back together and letting that kind of crosstalk happen again.
Yeah. I want to ask you about theater in general. How long have you been interested in theater? You introduced yourself, I'm mostly known as a musician, but theater seems to me to always have been there for you. Would you say that's right?
For a long time. Not too many years after I started performing in a musical group, I started going to like downtown experimental theater in New York, which kind of blew my mind. I didn't know theater could be like that. It was, there were things that had no narrative, but still held my attention. There were things that were very meta, where they started talking about the performance while they're doing the performance, all sorts of things that just blew my mind. It was like hearing rock and roll or whatever for the first time. Right. It was really amazing for me. I also, when I was touring, I started going to see theater and various kinds of things in other countries, where it was like, I went to see a lot of Japanese theater, where there was No or Bunraku or Kabuki and various rituals in Bali or different places like that. And I realized that what I was doing on stage was a kind of theater, very artificial. The idea that when we step on stage and play music, that it's our authentic self is complete bullshit. We're giving a performance. The minute we step on stage and these lights hit us, it's theater. If somebody gives a PowerPoint lecture, it's theater. So I thought, we may as well acknowledge this.
It's amazing that you say that, because my next question was going to be, do you ever feel like you're in character even when you're just doing a musical show? And I feel it even watching your performances, you have costume changes. And you have exaggerated costumes, and you have...
Yeah.
So you're playing with that whole aspect of it. But you kind of had to discover it about yourself. Yeah. Going back to theater of a mind, you were talking earlier, we were saying, because we were looking at your notebooks earlier, which I found really fascinating, and you just had words like perception, memory, self, will, and as though there was a flow between those that you were discovering or thinking about. Is that something in theater of the mind that you're really trying to pursue, where ultimately understanding the self is kind of the ultimate goal?
Yes. Is our sense of self a complete illusion? Or is it something that it has some basis in reality, but it's completely changing all the time? It's completely malleable. I tend to think it's very malleable.
Does it make you uncomfortable? Did you have any moments of anxiety or like existential dread that?
No, I thought more to myself, is this going to make audiences uncomfortable? But then we want to give them the kind of whatever, the sugar at the end and go. But the fact that it can change is an opportunity. It means that you're not stuck being one kind of person, one way, doing this. You're not, it's not like that. You can actually change your life as you go, who you are. And we do that. And that's an incredible thing. The fact that you're not the same person that you were when you were 10 years old.
And this character that's kind of taking you on this journey is acknowledging that in some sense. It was very interesting for you to reverse the direction for the character who opens the journey to be dead, climbing out of a coffin, and going back to childhood. Why did you choose that reversal in the arrow of time?
Complete accident. In one of our workshops on Governor's Island, there was an actress who said, I think I can do the whole thing. I got it all memorized. She did all these different rooms, and I realized, now I realize it's about one life. And because it ends with you being embodied as a small child, I thought, it's a life backwards. There's where the narrative is.
Another curiosity for me was, so neuroscience has recently captured your imagination, but you're interested in all kinds of science. And I'm wondering, is there some future in which you try this again with a different subject?
Oh, yes, of course. Some things are probably more appropriate than others. Yes, some of the things people have we're talking about this week, I think, probably not.
For some reason, I feel I shouldn't pry. So this idea also of process struck me as super interesting. You take a long view of projects, and while you're thinking about them, do they have to succeed from beginning to end? You do something at a car dealership in Menlo Park, and then it's at Governor's Island, and ultimately it's at Denver. Is that because they're succeeding the whole way? Do you tolerate failures?
There's lots of failures. Lots of failures. I mean, the whole idea that we needed a narrative to kind of to connect with people emotionally. We didn't have that at first, and we realized, we need that.
And the failures don't bother you. You don't feel stopped in your tracks. Like, hey, this didn't work at the car dealership, we're done. You take a very, very long view, it seems to me.
It's been like 8 years or so working on the thing. So there's time to cut and paste and go, okay, that didn't work, move on. One of my favorite things that didn't work was one of the things we did in Menlo Park, which was based on an experiment by Alex Todorov at Princeton. It was you would get shown 2 political candidates, just headshots. You didn't know who they were. You didn't know if they were Republican, Democrat, or where, or whatever, anything about them. You'd see each one for 3 seconds, a whole series, and you had to quickly decide which one you thought was going to win the election. And the results were usually around 60% of the audience got it right. And
how did you decide what was right? Were they actual political candidates?
They were actual political candidates, so we could go, okay, now we're going to show you, based on your decisions, and based on we know who actually won these elections in various states around the country, who actually, how close you came. They got it like 60%, we aggregated it, showed it to him on a screen, and it was just kind of like, ugh. I mean, that's how we decide elections.
Right.
And so you had that kind of letdown, and you also had the 40% who said, I did not pick that one. Mm-hmm. And so they felt like they were not responsible for this bad news. And so I just thought, okay, there are a lot of social science and psychological science works by average and aggregate and things like that. And I thought, that does not really work in this kind of theatrical context.
So there's this tension between pushing people, challenging them to think differently or reevaluate their perceptions of the world, of themselves, to have some level of discomfort, but not so much that they shut down and aren't receptive to this context that you've offered.
They have to be kind of enjoying it.
Yeah. I want to give the audience a chance to ask questions, but before I do, David, I just did want to ask you kind of what's next? Or is it too early for you to say? I mean, this project is amazing. It's going to be installed. You'll be working on this for a few months. And then?
I'm working on other things. There's working on writing music. There's a project where I'm inviting high school students to interpret other musical artists' songs in their own way. So it's really giving agency to these high school kids. Again, these things might take a while. How about you? What's next for you?
Still interested in black holes. You know? Haven't gotten bored of black holes yet. I'm actually working on a paper about whether or not there are extraspatial dimensions in the universe, and if they're hiding the dark energy. So, you know, mainstream kind of real populist stuff. But yeah, I, like you, struggle between, in a way that I quite love, super technical, fascinating scientific experiments in the context of their calculations or the lab or wherever, and then finding also some narrative arc to bring it out of the lab to a larger conversation. And often when I write books about really crazy subjects, like whether or not the universe is infinite or finite, I'm not trying to be pedagogical, nor are you. And I think that's something we both just instinctively share. We're trying to hit people in their solar plexus.
There's a lot of
have
drama.
An experience.
The whole gravity wave thing, there was a lot of dramas.
A lot of dramas.
There's a lot of dramas.
Yeah.
People losing funding, people competing with one another.
Yeah.
All the squabbles and all kinds of stuff going on.
Totally fascinating. I mean, it's that which eventually was awarded a Nobel Prize. People spent 50, 60 years of their lives in a project that they did not know would succeed. And at some point, I became more interested in that story for a little while, just the climbing Mount Everest, the insanity of needing to know, the idea that you would sacrifice your life to a project that could fail. This is a side of science that people don't really understand. And it's really the space where most scientists operate. Very few walk away with Nobel Prizes at the end of the day. And you have to have this kind of madness to know. And I think that there's something instinctively human about that and about those stories. Just like people who climb Mount Everest, it's kind of incomprehensible, risking your life just to have a view from the peak. And that's really what some scientists do. They kind of risk their lives just to be the first to have that view from the summit. And there's something intrinsically human about the pursuit.
Was it Vera Rubin who first made the discoveries that led to the dark matter and black holes?
Yeah, Vera Rubin was one of the very early people. Everyone was very upset. Vera Rubin passed away because before she was awarded a Nobel Prize. I think it was an extreme source of frustration for a lot of people. But Vera Rubin was one of the first women ever to work at Caltech to break the barrier where she was allowed access to telescopes, where she just was a pioneer. And she, just by looking at galaxies very patiently, very audacious, didn't really care what anyone else thought, if it was popular or not popular, was one of the first people to realize that there's more mass in galaxies than there is light, that there's a form of matter that we don't recognize, That is not the same kind of matter that makes up our bodies. It is called dark matter, but should probably be called invisible, because it's probably in this room right now, and we see right through it. It's not dark. It doesn't look dark. It looks invisible. So it's a bad name, but it just is a proxy for something we know is there and we don't know what it is.
Wanted to give her some credit.
Credit to Vera Rubin. So before we open up for questions, will everyone please just join me in thanking David for sharing it?
Oh,
And me.
thank you, Janna.
I'll moderate the questions, or you want to pick?
Oh, no, you go ahead.
Okay. If you, essentially, best idea is if you have a mic, you got the floor. If you have a mic, you can ask away.
Yes, I wanted to ask David, if you were an opera singer, if you were at the Met, the difference between, let's say, acting, what would you suggest for anyone who's performing it as a singer?
Say again, if
In other words, I'm trying to get
in the
mind.
context of an opera, you mean?
Yeah, well, no. All right. Let's assume you're a Broadway performer.
Uh-huh.
All right. What's going on in that mind? And then instead of being a Broadway performer, instead of acting, let's assume you're singing.
Oh, I see. Like in a musical or an opera or something like that. Yeah.
Right.
Your lines, your dialogue is all basically all sung. Mm-hmm. Once you're on that, once your train's on those tracks, you can't get off. But it's good that way too, because you know that you're safe as long as you stay on those rails. I know for me, an odd thing happened after doing a Broadway run. People ask me, did it get boring doing the same show night after night? Well, my show was a little bit different. It was more like a stand-up comedy in that
You were addressing the audience
I would
directly.
directly address the audience. So if an audience reacted to something, I could react to their reaction and then react to that, and you could kind of, they knew that I was listening to them. Whereas a normal show like what you're talking about, like an opera, unless there's huge applause for some aria, the show basically ignores the audience. Yeah, so it's a little bit of a difference there.
Even if you're doing something theatrical when you're singing, whether it's performing an album at a normal stadium type of situation or American Utopia or an opera, it's tracing that you are at once in character and also bringing yourself.
Yeah.
And that's a very interesting combination for the performer, that they're in character, but there's a huge sense of what force they bring to that. And is that I know, is that hard to navigate sometimes, hard to get right sometimes, where you're too much playing the character or you're bringing too much of yourself, or do you just feel that there's just a certain intuition and you know when you land it?
It's a little bit trial and error. With that show, I think we tried four different endings until we hit one that we felt like that has the emotional punch that we need.
Again, if you have a mic, ask away.
Thank you, David, for being with us today. The last few years have been a historic, crazy period in our society, from 2016 election, and then COVID, and then George Floyd, and then now inflation, of course, the news of last Friday. As an artist, how do you interpret news that's around us, what you feel in society, and at what point will we start to see artists express in their way what we've all experienced?
Wow. My feeling is that it's that art and music and all this can bring people together and kind of explore kind of what we have in common. I don't think it's that good at being kind of a didactic message and saying, you know, like if I was to write a song about voting rights or whatever, which I might feel very strongly about, maybe it doesn't work that well as a song. But like in the show I just did, I can do a kind of audience demonstration about voting rights that everybody kind of experiences what it's about. And so I think there's ways to do it. Well, it's when the pandemic hit, I couldn't write songs anymore. Some people managed to write. I was kind of overwhelmed. I started just doing drawings.
Interesting. If you have the mic, you can go ahead. And if you want to get the mic, you should raise your hand as well. Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Samara. I'm a director and producer. I wonder, in the world of theater, are there any major life lessons that you learned along the road that you wish you knew when you were just starting out, or any big mistakes that you wish you could have known about or done differently?
Wow. It's very hard to imagine things being different. I've made plenty of mistakes. I know musically, at one point, I went out and said, I'm going to do all new material. I'm not going to do any of the old songs. Boy, was that a mistake.
Talk about an angry audience.
Yeah. We had a good time, but they did say, if he's going to do that, I don't know if I'll come back again.
But it strikes me that you don't take it too hard. Like, you don't get discouraged. You go, okay. You're kind of analytical about it.
Yeah.
That didn't work. Yeah. Okay. Let's try something different.
Yep. Whoops.
Please. Yes.
I'm Billy Crockett, musician from Austin, Texas. My question for you is a little similar, I guess, to the way that you interpret things like news, but in this case, the new piece. And by the way, thank you for all of your interpreting heretofore. But the neurological, the scientific disciplines, the intellectual location of that, you take and bring into a theater setting, into a engagement that, as you've said today, becomes narrative and becomes emotional, or it hasn't worked yet if it doesn't become an emotional experience for us. And I wonder how, and also just knowing that as a culture we haven't assimilated so much of what science has done. General relativity was 115 years ago, and we still don't really know or feel what that is. And I'm wondering what artists can do. what can artists and what can art bring, what can theater and music do to help us belong to that knowledge and that knowledge to us?
Well, we're trying. I think one way to do it is to make it personal, to make it so that the audience, by themselves, make the inferences. Like if you said, show them perceptual things into that they should be able to a little bit be able to participate and go and realize for themselves, that means that maybe half the things I see are not exactly, representing reality. You let them figure that out, and rather than telling them. And I feel like that's a way to kind of have those things be emotionally engaging rather than kind of shoving it down their throats.
Amazing. I'm aware that we're exactly at time, and they've asked me to stick to time so that everyone has a chance to get to the next session, but that's a beautiful thought to close on. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
For coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.